Yeah, something sure is happening here, and what it is ain't exactly clear. But Retake Democracy through this radio show and through the blog, and increasingly through our Zoominar series, tries to tell you what's going on and what you might be able to do about it. Good morning. You're listening to Retake Our Democracy. It's a weekly radio broadcast that airs at 8:30 a.m. every Saturday morning on KSFR 101.1 FM, your Santa Fe public radio station. And we're really grateful for KSFR these days, because when we're all shut in, it's great to have information coming our way. Today, we're going to be talking with Maya Van Rossum, and she is the, I'll tell you a story about that when we're done, Maya. She is the founder of the Green Amendment for the Generations, and I like the For the Generations. It has that resonance of the indigenous people doing it for 7 generations out. And we've spoken before, and we tried to hook up once before to get together to try and organize an event, and she was in Santa Fe a few months ago.
Well, I was actually in several times over the course from August actually through January, February.
Okay, so we're going to talk to her for a bit, but we first got to do a couple of announcements. I wanted to let you know that last week I spoke with Sylvia Hayes, and she's an environmentalist, a writer, a trainer, and an expert in sustainable development. And she's also, interestingly, the former First Lady of the state of Oregon. And we had a great conversation. If you missed it, it's available at retakeourdemocracy.org. You just hover over the actions and events menu, and you'll see Retake Conversations, which is where you'll be able to find this conversation today on Saturday morning. It'll be posted there, the full conversation. We'll probably go well over the 30 minutes on the radio show. And so the podcasts and now videos are available on our website. The week prior, we had an interview with Philip Shepard, and he is an international expert in embodiment. Basically what this involves is he is someone who believes we as a culture and as individuals are way too much in our heads. We're way too trying to figure out things and manage things and manipulate things. And whether that's people, or natural resources, or what have you, his position is that we need to step back and pause and be silent with ourselves and understand our body and listen to our hearts far more than we listen to our heads. And that conversation was so fascinating. We went on for over an hour and a half, and I highly recommend it. And it's available at the same place I just mentioned. And so I want to also alert our listeners that we've started a Zoominar series, and I was talking to Maya a little bit about it before we got live for this radio show. And last night, we're recording this on Wednesday, the radio show on Wednesday, but so it was Tuesday night, we had a Zoominar with Dar Jamail and Greg Rogers, and it was extraordinary. Dar Jamail is the author of The End of Ice. It was identified as one of the 10 best science books for 2019 by the Smithsonian. It's up for awards for best book of 2019. He's incredibly insightful, a unique combination of spiritual and scientific. And he brings so much passion and deep thought about our condition. He is not at all optimistic, and neither was Greg Rogers. But they were candid. And based on the responses we got from the 130 people who were on the Zoominar last night, it was pretty unanimous that this was a powerful, powerful conversation. And that is available also at retakeourdemocracy.org. Again, by hovering over that actions and events menu, you'll see Zoominar series. And if you just click on that and scroll down, you'll find that. And other Zoominars we've done. We did one with the land commissioner the week before that. And that also was quite a informative discussion. So we're going to be having more of those going forward. In 2 weeks on the 19th, we're going to have a conversation with Heather Ferguson and Dee Dee Feldman. Heather Ferguson is the director of Common Cause. Dee Dee Feldman's a former state senator. And we're also having Kathleen Sabo, who is the executive director of New Mexico Ethics Watch. And we're going to be talking about their report that delineated the outsized power that the gas and oil industry has in New Mexico in the legislature. And the week after that, we're having a conversation with New Mexico Voices and a triad of their folks, their researchers, their executive director, and their governmental relations officer, along with Representative Javier Martinez, who is the chair of the Revenue and Tax Committee for the legislature. And we're going to be talking about the budget crisis and the special session that's going to be coming probably in late June to try and address it. And so all of these things, we're going to have one on the Health Security Act after that, and on public banking. So all of these, I'll be to your home on Tuesday evenings at 6:30, and all you have to do is subscribe to the Retake Our Democracy blog, and you won't be able to avoid it, even if you try. So that's the preview. And now we're going to talk with Maya for a while, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Welcome, Maya.
Well, thank you so much for having me. But that's such a powerful set of guests that you're having. I'm really honored to be amongst them at this point.
Well, we're honored to have you. Truly honored. I like to let our guests do their own introduction. You'll have a unique path. I'm sure that when you were in high school, you weren't thinking you were going to be an environmental activist, or maybe you were, but I'm sure you weren't thinking of the Green Amendment. So how did you get involved in environmentalist activity, and how did you land at the Green Amendment concept?
So I have been a lifelong environmentalist. I came to it not through parents that were themselves activists, but parents who lived what they believed. And they believed in the importance of valuing the earth and valuing other people. And when there was an injustice, speaking up and trying to right the wrong, whether it was a large injustice or a small injustice. And they supported, caring for the earth. And so for me, I sort of brought the two of those together, my love of the earth, but also the values of speaking up when I saw injustice, put them together to bring me on my career path. And I'm very fortunate that I came to the best place for me in terms of my life and my work pretty early on in my career. Shortly after I graduated law school and then got another degree, a master's of law, I had the honor of becoming the leader of a 4-state organization called the Delaware Riverkeeper Network that works in New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware. And being the Delaware Riverkeeper, having the job of being the voice of the Delaware River and making sure that the river and all of its communities, that their needs were heard and understood and given the highest level of protection and value anytime a decision was being made that would impact them. So I've been doing that work for 26 years, and I still wear my Delaware Riverkeeper hat. But over the course of being an advocate and leading litigation as the client for the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, we had an incredibly powerful victory in December of 2013 that put me on the path of founding this new national Green Amendments for the Generations organization and movement. And long story short, we used a long ignored constitutional environmental rights amendment, what I call a Green Amendment, in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania to defeat an excruciatingly pro-fracking piece of legislation. Now, most people know fracking has been happening in Pennsylvania for quite a while, and unfortunately continues to this day. The thing is with this law, if this law known as Act 13 was allowed to pass, it was a law that put in place automatic waivers from environmental protection standards, gave the industry the power of eminent domain in certain circumstances in terms of gas storage, alleviated them of the obligation to notify those on private well water for their drinking water supply, of having to notify them if their water had potentially been contaminated by nearby fracking, even mandating that towns allow drilling and fracking operations right in the heart of their residential communities. And so things were really bad in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania when it came to fracking. But if Act 13 had been allowed to stand, things would have gotten a whole lot worse. And I, in my role as the Delaware Riverkeeper, and my organization, the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, determined that we had to challenge this law when it was passed. The thing is, how do you challenge a law passed by your legislature and signed by the governor? It's a very difficult thing to do. You really need a higher power. And we realized that in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, there was a long ignored constitutional environmental rights amendment, what I call a green amendment, in the Pennsylvania Bill of Rights that we could and should use to attempt to challenge that law. Long story short, we did so successfully. And portions of Act 13 were declared to be unconstitutional because they violated the environmental rights of the people of Pennsylvania. And in that moment, we breathed legal life into this long ignored constitutional environmental rights amendment. And when I went and reflected on the power and the importance of that victory, both legally, but also emotionally for the people of Pennsylvania, when it came to this idea of environmental rights, I realized that there was a really powerful message that needed to be brought to communities across the nation. I started to look at constitutions in other states, and I found that there's only one other state with a constitutional green amendment as powerful as what Pennsylvania has, and that's the state of Montana. And so that put me on the path of writing a book called The Green Amendment, creating this new national movement, a new national organization designed to try to inspire and then help states advance this idea of passing green amendments in state constitutions across the nation. And I know that the people are thinking, what about Article 20, Section 21 of the New Mexico Constitution? And that has some really great language in it, but it doesn't rise to the level of being a green amendment, because what it essentially does is says that your legislature should pass environmental protection laws. And that's what they do. That's what every government does.
Right.
But it doesn't allow you to challenge those laws on constitutional grounds if they overstep and violate the inalienable rights to a healthy environment.
All right. Well, I can see how this conversation is going to unfold, because there's ways in which there are people in this state now who are a tad frustrated with the process. And one of them happens to be our land commissioner. And that's a good start, but also a number of legislators who are, and that's why we're having the show coming up, the Zoominar with Common Cause, about the outsized power that the gas and oil industry has in the legislature, because it's almost as if to get something through, they have to read it and go, that's okay, we'll go along with that. And we're past that. We're past that. So I know you were in New Mexico in February and presented at the Unitarian Universalist Church. How did that go, and did it lead, do you have a group of advocates, a team working in New Mexico to try and advocate for some form of expansion of the language you talked about that's already in our Constitution?
Yeah, so the last time I was in New Mexico was in February, but I actually started my almost monthly visits to the state starting in August, every time meeting with a new group, but also having some who had been part of a previous conversation or presentation coming back to explore this idea. And the truth is, we are growing a coalition in the state of New Mexico. We had tremendous plans to really pull this together, do a lot of outreach to environmental organizations, Native American organizations, groups of all kinds, to introduce this idea and hopefully build a statewide coalition. Unfortunately, those efforts got cut short by the pandemic. But we are now sort of, we've reformulated our plan, and we have a lot of activities coming up that are designed to build a New Mexico coalition that would come together and advance this idea of a New Mexico constitutional green amendment. And so there's lots of opportunity for people to get involved. We have a petition, we have an organizational sign-on letter, and we're really trying to build a collective of partners, individuals and organizations that can work together to advance this idea.
Well, we want to make sure and leave you time at the end of the radio show before we kick into podcast to share some of that information about activities and groups and so forth coming forward. I'm guessing a lot of it is pretty tentative given the nature of the day. So what is the process? I mean, you've been coming and having conversations. How does a state take that and translate it into an amendment?
So every state really has a different process and different pathways. They're similar, but they're different in fundamental ways. Most states, including the state of New Mexico, either has as its primary mode or has as one of the opportunities for advancing a constitutional amendment is the legislative path, where you have legislators who champion this idea, and then they propose it, and then each of the legislative houses have to vote in support of it. In some states it's once, in some states it's twice, in some states it's a majority vote, in some states it's 2/3 or 3/5, but some conglomeration of the few. And then once you have that passage, the provision goes before the people of the state to vote on it. I'm only aware of one state where there's a role for the governor besides the bully pulpit. We of course want governors to rise up in support of this effort. New Mexico, really has one of the more direct pathways. In New Mexico, we just need to have a legislative proposal, and each of the houses need to pass the amendment by majority vote once, and then it goes before the people. So we could have, and we are identifying that we've been talking with legislators at various conferences and things. They've been hearing presentations about this, and we actually are identifying champions. And Senator Antoinette Cedillo Lopez is really rising up in support of this. In fact, we're going to be having a Facebook Live event with her on May 21st to talk about environmental issues in New Mexico, but also the Green Amendment concept. And, there is the possibility to have a proposal in the 2021 legislative session, have it pass both houses, and then have it before the people of Pennsylvania on the November ballot. And by the end of 2021, the people of New Mexico could have a green amendment that could help them deal with all kinds of issues, from the oil and gas industry to PFAS contamination to the produced water legislation that is
One of my favorites.
A grave concern. So it could be a real near-term opportunity if we could get people together and to rally around this and get the legislators, at least a majority of them, to vote for it.
Well, we'll talk offline more about that in terms of how you can feed me some information so we can try and beef that attendance up at the Facebook thing, and then, but also do some, because Antoinette's a friend, and we have other friends in the legislature, and this is something that needs to happen. I think that it's interesting. The COVID-19 thing has caused people to kind of really rethink things. I mean, I think industry is going to be working very hard to try and just get us to come back to normal and go back to the old rules and the old game and the old rat race. I think there's a lot of people out there going, wait a minute, we really need to rethink this because this didn't work for us. And it seems to have worked for some people, and I wonder who those people are. So I think there's a possibility, an opening for us right now, and we really have to take advantage of it. So there are many ways to create a framework for protecting the environment. What caused you to settle on using a constitutional amendment? And I know you mentioned that Pennsylvania has maybe the strongest bill, and Montana also, but in preparing for this conversation, I looked up and found that like Bolivia also has a really strong amendment it's a Mother Earth amendment. How are they different? How are they similar? And why did you pick an amendment rather than just another bill?
So, having been done environmental advocacy and litigation for 26 years now, and being an attorney myself, it is glaringly obvious to me that our current system of environmental protection laws is fundamentally failing us. And all we have to do is look at communities across the nation, across the state of New Mexico, see how many people are drinking contaminated water and breathing polluted air, see how much power the oil and gas industry has and developers have, right? Like, look at the number of toxic sites that people have to host in their communities, waiting, begging, pleading for cleanup that never comes. And so many more. Watching, forests falls and wetlands be filled and streams be drained dry, right? Or contaminated. We just see so much damage. And the thing is, this is all happening. And environmental injustice, right? Environmental racism is just so prevalent with our Black and brown communities, indigenous communities, low income and immigrant communities continuing to be unfairly targeted for devastating polluting operations. And this isn't happening in spite of the environmental protection laws we have in place and the system of government we have. It is happening because of those laws, because of the ways that they are written and the ways they are implemented. The way our laws across New Mexico, across the nation are written, they are written to accept pollution and degradation as a foregone conclusion. Something that must happen in order to support our modern day life. And so we will accept it, and we will wait till we get to the end of the decision-making process and figure out how we're going to manage the pollution and the degradation that we are allowing to happen through the issuance of permits. Our current system of government does not begin from the premise, whether it's legislating, regulating, policies, funding, anything, does not begin from the premise of how do we prevent pollution and degradation first? How do we construct our laws and our decisions to prevent the harm in the first instance? They jump right to management. And of course, there are a lot of gaps in the laws. There are a lot of things that are not regulated, right? And when you get, bad people in government, there's very quick pathway to roll back even the legislation and regulations that we have on the books that are giving us some degree of protection. But a constitutional amendment is above those laws. It brings the right to pure water and clean air, a stable climate, and healthy environments to be above all of those laws, to recognize and protect the inalienable rights of all of the of environmental rights for the people, by the people. And what a constitutional amendment that's placed in the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution does, it says to government officials, when you govern over us, you must, whether any form of governing, you must do so in a way that does not overreach and infringe on our inalienable human constitutional rights to a healthy environment. And what that necessarily does, because it's above the laws and it's a restraint on government infringement, it requires government to think about prevention of harm first, to consider the science, the facts, the cumulative impacts before they write and pass the law, before they issue the regulation or render the decision. I mean, think about the right to bear arms. Think about the right to free speech. Think about private property rights. When government is engaged in legislating or regulating or anything that might infringe on any of those rights, before they put pen to paper, they think about how are we going to avoid infringing on those constitutional rights. They think about it from the get-go so that they don't get to the end of the process and find themselves in a constitutional pickle. If you have a Green Amendment, the same thing applies to the environment. So that's how I settled on this idea. The Constitution, the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution, is the most powerful law we have in our state and federal governments. It's been used by others to serve their interests, whatever they are, right? Some of them are interests I wholeheartedly agree with. Some of them perhaps not so much. Some I'm ambivalent about. Whatever it is, we need to use this most powerful law for the rights of all people, right? All people to clean water, clean air, a stable climate, and healthy environments. So that's how I got to this place.
Okay, well, it sounds like I'm convinced, Maya. I need to take a quick break and remind our listeners that you're listening to KSFR 101.1 FM, and that is your public radio station here in Santa Fe. And it's at times like this that it is most valuable to all of us. KSFR brings you incredible radio all day long. A good many of the moderators that bring that information to you, like myself, are volunteers, but they still need sound engineers. They need a studio, even though this is my office. And so they have all these costs, and they need some donations. So go to ksfr.org. This is Wednesday. Tuesday was Giving Tuesday. Make it Giving Wednesday, although you're listening to this on Saturday, so give on Saturday. ksfr.org, go to the donate button, click on it, and give them $20, and just view it as your ticket for admission to some really great programming. If for no other reason, BBC and Amy Goodman and Democracy Now! Are enough reason, but throw in Richard Wolff and Retake Our Democracy and Somos un Pueblo Unido, and you've got a lot of shows there that keep you informed on some very, very important issues. So we've got only about 2.5 minutes left in the live show. And so we're obviously going to be using the podcast because we've got a lot more to talk about. But before we kind of wind down, I want to give Maya a chance to tell you more about her organization, how you can get more information, and anything coming up in New Mexico. So it's your floor for a minute there.
Great. So the most important way for people to get more information generally is to go to www.forthegenerations.org. There's a lot of resources, information, videos, webinars, fact sheets there. And there's also a special page for New Mexico that you can get to through that pathway, or if you go www.nmgreenamendment.org, it'll take you right to the New Mexico page, give you information about what's going on and ways to get involved, including signing the petition in support, or if you're an organization, signing on your organization in support.
Just wrote that down, and I'll sign up as soon as we get off.
Perfect. We have right now, well, it's gonna air before Saturday, but people will be able to go online and after the fact and review a PBS piece. It's the first part of a 2-part series that's going to be talking about the Green Amendment movement and concept and how powerful it is. Part 1 is the basics. Part 2 is going to be through the environmental justice lens. So I encourage people to go to forthegenerations.org, find the link, and view that. But we're going to be doing some live chats coming down the road having to do with the Green Amendment. The first one's going to be on May 21st, again with Senator Antoinette Cedillo Lopez, talking about environmental issues in New Mexico and talking about how the Green Amendment can be helpful. That will be on the website. There'll be a link with all the information, but it will be at 6 p.m. in the evening. And, you know, we have a number of other things that will be coming up, but that's the one that's most near term. And I encourage people to turn to that and get looped in, sign the petition. You'll be added to a Google group so you can be part of the ongoing discussion for how we want to strategically advance the Green Amendment in the state of New Mexico. And I want you to know New Mexico is not standing alone. Since I wrote the book, The Green Amendment, and have started this national Green Amendment movement, we actually have Green Amendment proposals advancing in New York, New Jersey, Maryland, West Virginia, and Vermont, with tremendous and growing interest in the state of New Mexico and even in Arizona. So this is something
so
that's happening.
We're out of time, and so I'm going to have to cut you off there. I didn't do it last week, and I got reprimanded by the engineer. And so I want to do this right. We're going to cut off here. And for more on this, go to retakeourdemocracy.org and go to the actions and events menu and hover over that for a second and look for Retake Conversations, and you'll be able to listen to the full conversation with Maya. That will be posted on Saturday, generally by noon. So that's it for Retake Our Democracy, and we'll be back next week. And I think we're going to be talking with Joanne Ferrari from the state legislature. And so that's it for today. Stay safe, stay healthy, but stay active. We got to fix this mess. We'll be back next week. And by the miracle of podcast, we're back already. And
I have to say, I loved how you ended your radio show with stay active. That's so important. I love that.
Well, I try to do that every time, but when you run over, sometimes you clip yourself a bit. But we have the latitude now to just take our time, because it doesn't matter how long we go at this point. So let's fast forward to 2023, and the New Mexico state legislature has passed the Green Amendment. The voters have voted for it. How could passage of a Green Amendment help activists and progressive legislators in advancing legislation and regulation in the state? And then fast forward to 2026, and the Green Amendment has passed and been inserted into the US Constitution. How do activists and legislators on a national level use that to accelerate policy change? And walk us through the various ways in which the Green Amendment could make all those things happen.
So first and foremost, right, a Green Amendment, the goal is to advance good things, right? So we can avoid the litigation and avoid the harms that would result from bad decision making. And if you have a constitutional Green Amendment that recognizes the rights of all the people to pure water, clean air, a stable climate, and healthy environments, or some version of that, right? Like every state, it's written a little bit differently. But what you do is you have created the mandate that government officials must take actions and render decisions that honor that obligation, but also for the forward-thinking, environmentally caring, progressive legislators and regulators, you've provided the foundation upon which they can advance all of their good works, right? Because grounding it in the constitutional is a powerful foundation for strong environmental protection measures or decision-making. When it comes to legislators, of course, that's going to have to do with things like passing legislation and funding decisions. But for regulators, when you have a regulator that's trying to decide whether or not to issue a permit for a highly polluting industrial operation, whether it's the oil and gas industry or something else, right? They will have to think about whether or not, even though the laws and the regulations that apply to that industrial operation would suggest that a permit should be issued, the regulators are going to have to do an additional layer of review, a constitutional layer of review, and make the determination that issuing that permit that will allow that pollution to the air or water in that community will not, either on its own or when added to already existing contamination, will not result in the infringement of the constitutional right. And if they determine, and they have to be able to show that they've done this analysis, and if they determine that it will infringe on a constitutional right, they can't issue the permit. So it's not just about the laws and the regulations anymore. It's about the constitutional rights of the people. And if a person or a community feels that their water supply has been so contaminated by virtue of this permit or this decision that there is an infringement on the constitutional right, they will be able to ground their legal challenge in the Constitution, whether or not there's a law. Like if you think about PFAS, right, per and polyfluoroalkyl chemicals, for many, many years, they were used unregulated. And in many states, right, there is not a layer of regulation that deals with that existing water contamination. If you're in a state without a Green Amendment, you need to be able to find a law to enforce, to protect you. If you're in a state with a Green Amendment, you can ground your challenge to a decision or your activism to force protections out of the government in the constitutional duty. So it's really powerful for advancing good stuff. It's really powerful for defending against bad stuff. You know, when you think about the produced water bill, again, if you have a piece of legislation that's passed by your legislature, signed by your governor, and you don't have an overarching constitutional provision in which to ground a legal challenge, all you can do is try to advocate for your legislators to roll back the law, right? But if you have a constitutional right to a healthy environment and you can show that the implementation of that law will result in a constitutional violation of environmental rights, then you could use the Constitution to challenge, in whole or in part, that kind of bad decision making. In the case of the state land commissioner, right? She's talking about her concerns about flaring and how the oil and gas industry are just flaring off gas for free, right? Well, if there was a green amendment in the state of New Mexico, which made clear that the natural resources of the state belonged to the people and that the government was the trustee of those resources for the beneficiaries, which are the people, all the people, including future generations. That's an important element, by the way, of a modern day green amendment. Then the state land commissioner could ground her efforts to force the oil and gas industry to pay for that gas that's being flared off in the green amendment, because those are trust resources that are being flared away for free. And one could very easily see how that would be a constitutional violation of the duty of the trustee, the government trustee. But she could also use that authority to say that those special places and spaces, special for Native American communities, culturally, sacred lands, environmentally, places like Chaco Canyon, you know, where she's trying to put in place a buffer of protection. A green amendment could be used as the basis for that kind of important decision. The thing to remember about a green amendment is it's not a panacea. And when you pass it, right, it won't instantly stop everything. The oil and gas industry will not instantly evaporate. But you will have—
They're doing that on
oh,
their—
no, they're doing that during COVID. But other things as well, like PFAS, right, and toxic sites.
Right.
But you will now have the most powerful tool to go case by case and bring the constitutional challenges that will, one, help address many of these problems and issues, and two, lay the precedent block by block by block that will help us push out the environmentally damaging industries, right? So it's a really incredibly powerful tool. And again, I can't stress enough, Article 20, Section 21, as well as I think it's Article 16 that talks about the appropriation of water. These provisions in New Mexico's Constitution don't recognize and protect the inalienable rights of all people to clean water, clean air, a stable climate, and healthy environments, and set them as fundamental rights that are legally enforceable by virtue of the fact that they're in the Constitution. What they say is that your state legislators should go forth and pass legislation to appropriate water and protect the environment. And even if they do a bad job at that, as was demonstrated by a 2015 case trying to rely on Article 20, Section 21, as the court made very, very clear, the obligation under the Constitution of the legislature is to pass the laws. If you disagree with those laws, your option beyond advocacy is to vote them out of office. But you can't challenge those laws as being a violation of the inalienable rights to clean water, because that's not your right in the New Mexico Constitution.
Okay. My guess is that, you know, as this starts to brew in New Mexico and other states, there are going to be attorneys with the New Mexico Oil and Gas Association who are going to be hunkered down on many fronts. But, you know, obviously we'll have to deal with misinformation, disinformation, et cetera, and massive ad campaigns about the world will end if we pass this. But what about legal challenges? Is there, if you pass a constitutional amendment, what legal redress is there to challenge that amendment? I mean,
Well, yeah, I mean, if the legislature adds an amendment to the Constitution, and somebody wants to get rid of it, then what they would have to do is get an amendment to get rid of it. Because the job of the judiciary, of the courts, is to interpret the Constitution and
right,
interpret the laws. They don't get to say that the Constitution is unconstitutional,
right. That's
right?
what I was getting at.
Yeah. So
That's the
great.
beauty of what you're trying to do. I see that now. It's like, it's sort of a priori, before we start a conversation, there's this context. And now this is the context. And you can't just, reverse a little law over here so that you can open the floodgates for produced water. I can still see challenges here, not legal challenges, but when you've got, for example, a Speaker of the House in the state legislature here, who has been quoted as saying the Produced Water Act was the greatest piece of environmental legislation in the history of New Mexico. You can see that different kinds of acts can be viewed differently by different kinds of people. And I think the perspective, for instance, with the Produced Water Act is we're using so much and making toxic so much water from the gas and oil industry and the fracking that we're a drought state. We've got to do something. So we'll take this water and we'll figure out ways to use it. And, there's another approach where maybe you just stop drilling. And maybe now but that's the way I can see arguments being made that this is in the best interests of your right to clean water. Because,
And you know what? And let's say that he's correct in that posture, right? Let's just assume that. Let's just take that at face value. Well, then he should be wholeheartedly for the passage of a Green Amendment, because then protecting the constitutional right of present and future generations to clean water should support his piece of legislation, right? I mean, so if that's truly the belief and the argument that's grounded in the science and grounded in the law, then he should not be fearful of a Green Amendment, right?
Well,
So,
one of the things about the COVID virus, I think for some people are starting to recognize that like science and facts actually do matter. And you can't just, dismiss them as fake news and get away with it. People die. And, when we talked about this in the Zoominar that we did last night, it's like a light has gone on for some people. And I think there's some hope in that by extending it. We have to learn that we have to trust experts because we're not experts, we're lay people. And if 95% of the experts in the world say A, B, and C is coming, we better plan for A, B, and C, and so hopefully Dr. Fauci, that's going to be part of his legacy, is that people learn to appreciate that science really matters. So,
and an interesting thing on that, very relevant to the Green Amendment, is one of the things that we've been able to prove and demonstrate through our litigation and through our activism around the Pennsylvania Green Amendment is be able to demonstrate that legally government decision makers have to be able to show that they have considered the science relevant to their decision if they are to defend their decision in the courts. They can't just issue a permit because they think the regulations tell them it's okay, and then later after the fact, in the face of a legal challenge, come up with an after the fact rationalization. That's not how the Constitution or the law works. I'm going to turn the light on. It's getting dark here. I think it's going to rain. So I'm going to quickly turn the light on.
All right.
There we go.
All right. We could use some rain. It's been a while.
By the way, I want you to know, in case anybody's thinking or wondering, I have solar on my roof and geothermal in my ground and an all-electric house. So when I turn on the lights, nobody can accuse me of being pro fossil fuels. It's my beautiful energy from the sun that's
Yeah, well, we have
coming
the
into my house.
same. We have the same, but not all electric house. We were proactive about that in relation to the stove, at least. So,
Well, and you know what? And I do want to, because I get all kinds of challenges. But really, what I really say to people, look, you know, it is solar isn't available for everyone, right? The
right,
technology or the cost, and that's one of the things again that's powerful about a green amendment. And really, it is government's duty to make sure that that energy alternative, that renewable alternative, is there and available for everybody, and to help you access it and to help you get it. And so, for the many people who don't yet have it, which is the majority of the people, my saying that I have it is not at all a criticism of the
right.
people. It's a criticism of government. Because as you've talked about with New Mexico, we experience here in Pennsylvania and other states, the government works very proactively to, force the oil and gas industry into the place where people have to be dependent upon them. And that's part of the problem. But government could reverse that and make it so that people can be and should be and are all on renewable energy sources. So it's a criticism of government when we talk about people not having solar panels, fueling their house. That's a government failure. And that's a failure that, as you know, and I know, needs to be changed near term. And maybe people are starting to see that in part due to the COVID crisis.
Mhm. Well, that's a good segue. So I was just curious, we had talked a little bit earlier about how COVID had sort of opened a lot of minds to different perspectives and different alternatives. And I'm wondering if in your work remotely now, you're finding that allies and individuals who are associated with those allies are more receptive to the Green Amendment and seeing that as something that maybe prior to COVID, they thought, well, that's kind of nice, and now they're sort of seeing it as, oh, we need to do this. Are you sensing any of that kind of shift?
So, the truth is, anytime I go into a community and, for the last 4 years and talked about the Green Amendment, talked about my book, The Green Amendment, talked about the national movement, people are really inspired, right? People haven't thought in the forefront of, throughout the entirety of their lives, they've been told about the importance of their rights to free speech and freedom of religion and due process rights and private property rights and the right to bear arms. But they've never been taught that there's something fundamentally missing, and that is the constitutional right to a healthy environment. And so they've never thought about it. And when you talk to them about it, when you bring it to the forefront of their mind that you have all of these other fundamental freedoms, but the most basic human need of clean water and clean air and healthy environments is not equally protected, a light goes on for them. They're shocked, they're stunned, they're angry, and then they're quickly inspired. And then they're overwhelmed by the enormity of what it takes to do any grassroots movement to make a change. And then they're excited, and then they're re-inspired when they realize that there actually is a pathway to success. And it's a pathway that, if we get mobilized, can be accomplished pretty quickly, particularly in a state like New Mexico. So I actually, I've just experienced incredible positive energy for this idea, which re-inspires me every time I get to talk to somebody about it, to see that light go on for them and to get them realizing that this is such a powerful tool. So it's exciting.
It's interesting. I don't sense any of that enthusiasm from you. See, this is why I so like the fact that there's a video now associated with this, because both you and Philip, and the two of the three last videos we've done, it's just perfectly clear that it's like, you'll run through walls to get this done. And that's something that's difficult to convey in radio. So I'm looking forward to putting this up on Saturday. how does the Green New Deal incorporate principles of environmental justice? You talked a little bit about how we tend to completely not overlook, just trot upon the environmental needs of brown communities, Black communities, indigenous communities, low-income communities. How does the Green Amendment address that?
So the beauty of a Green Amendment is it recognizes and protects the inalienable rights of all people, including future generations. That language and that terminology gives you the powerful environmental justice strength to help advance the environmental justice message, cause, litigation, advocacy, everything. Because especially the way the Green Amendments, the modern day Green Amendments that we're advancing, they include this trust language. Again, where the trust resources are the natural resources of the state, the government officials are the trustees, and the people are the beneficiaries. And under trust law, the trustee, part of their fiduciary obligations is to treat all of the beneficiaries equitably. So there are two ways that environmental justice gets helped. First off, everybody has an individual right to a healthy environment, and we all have that right co-equally. So government cannot say, I am going to sacrifice this Native American community in order to protect the environmental rights of this white community, because they both have the same equal constitutional right, and government must protect those rights for both communities. The trust language adds into it this additional legal strength of this fiduciary obligation to treat all the beneficiaries equitably, all the beneficiaries being present and future generations, again, regardless of color, ethnicity, income level. And so they become constitutionally bound to protect everybody, treat everybody, protect everybody and their environmental rights equitably, bringing into it that generational forward-thinking component, which also helps inform the landscape. But it's a constitutional necessity, the way a Green Amendment is written. You know, the way laws are written now, it's really more about, well, the regulations, if you can check the boxes, you can put that
Right.
highly polluting industrial operation where you want. And the way they have the boxes laid out and checked is you can put them all onto the same urban communities, the same Native American lands, right? Over and over and over again, because they don't require you to look at the cumulative impacts. What are the actual end result impacts to the waters of that community? A Green Amendment forces that kind of analysis. So it really is incredibly, incredibly powerful from an environmental justice perspective. And I do want to add, one of the things that we've added, you know, what I do when I go to work with communities in a state is I bring what I call model language, the best language from Pennsylvania, Montana, the Supreme Court decisions that we've gotten out of those states. But also in working with each state, we work to try to mold the language to serve the interests and the personality of that state. And one of the things that, you know, of course, very quickly emerged in New Mexico that you don't have in New Jersey or in the other states where I've been working is the powerful, important role of the Native American communities in the state of New Mexico. And so it became very quickly apparent that one of the elements that was missing from this model language was language that Native American communities could use to protect their sacred lands, their customs, their cultural connections with a healthy environment, right? And you know, all that belief system that's so fundamental to the Native American culture and beliefs. So we actually now have language we have added in that one of the things that has to be protected is the cultural values of a healthy environment. That language is there specifically, particularly so that Native Americans can use it to protect their fundamental beliefs and their connectivity with nature.
Right. Yeah. I'm very excited about this. I can't wait to, you know, get offline and talk a little bit more about strategies and stuff. One of the premises of Retake Our Democracy is that the economic and political systems that got us into this mess, and this mess could be defined as the climate mess, the COVID mess, and also the wealth inequality mess, Me Too, all of these things are connected. The dots are all connected. And the systems of capitalism and a kind of faux democracy are the systems that created that. And our position is that they're not suited to fix them, that we need to invent new systems. And again, the COVID virus has caused people to kind of put things on pause and consider this more with a little more receptivity. I'm wondering what that kind of new system might look like to you. I ask every guest this, and they come up with wildly different suggestions. But it doesn't have to do with a green amendment. It could have to do with something entirely different. But I'm suspecting there's going to be a green amendment connection here. But let's go.
So the vision of the future coming out of COVID, is that the real question?
Well, or what can we do if the system is broken and we don't want to just tweak it? What does the new system look like?
So you're right. I mean, for me, part of the new system has to include the passage of a green amendment in every single state constitution across the nation, and then ultimately at the federal level, right? Because state constitutions are the relationship of people with their state government, but they can't be used to hold Congress or the president accountable. So in doing the strategy of passing state green amendments, we are building the foundation necessary to ultimately get a federal green amendment that will allow us to hold the president and the Congress accountable for the absolute abhorrent behavior when it comes to the environment and, you know, the human inalienable rights that we all know we have to a healthy environment, but that aren't legally or constitutionally enforceable. So to me, that's fundamental and becomes part of how we create the system change. Because, you know, if somebody's violating your constitutional rights, if the government is allowing actions or activities that violate your constitutional right, the government can't defend that infringement on economic grounds. If the government's going to legally infringe on your constitutional right, they're going to have to show that there's a compelling state interest that allows them to do so. The economics of the private industry, that's not a compelling state interest, right? Fundamentally, that has to be a part of it. And, you know, I think you've already said it. Coming out of this, look, we have so many threats, and people often in my 26 years have said, what's the worst thing? What's the worst threat for the Delaware River? What's the worst threat for the environment? You know, there really isn't a worst. It is the cumulative impacts of all of it. And we need to have systems and mechanisms in place to address the oil and gas industry, PFAS, toxic sites, inappropriate development in floodplains, right? The destruction of our wetlands and our forests, for one thing or another. So we do need a system change. But I do think that coming out of the crisis, I do think we are in a powerful moment when people can see how powerful the oil and gas industry is, and how the rights and the needs and the protections of all people have been made subservient to that industry, amongst others, and they're rightfully angry about it, and how devastating the oil and gas industry is, and that we truly only have the next 10 years to check them. And that, you know, we are in a moment in time when we very literally need to flip a switch from oil and gas to renewables. And so to me, that's, you know, that's part of the ideal, putting in place the system change that allows us to deal with all of it. But the reality check is, if we don't get, you know, if we don't get the climate crisis addressed right now, that means oil and gas, then, you know, there's not going to be too much to fight for or fight about. But unlike your other guests, I am very hopeful. I am very hopeful. I deal and work with so many people, so committed, so passionate. People who weren't committed and passionate 6 months ago, a year ago, 1 month before they got involved in an issue, and they get involved, they see how they're impacted, and then quickly open their eyes to see how others are impacted. They see how they didn't care about fracking until the pipeline came through their community, but as soon as they realized that that pipeline was connected to fracking and LNG exports and the climate crisis, suddenly they get the connection, and they care now about the fracking, and they want to address it, and they see that the solution is the renewable energy sources, and that they are truly available. They are truly available for us to use right now, today. So I just see how powerfully, when we can inform people and engage people, how much they care and how much they want to make a difference and how much they do care about future generations. And so I have great hope that we are in a moment when we are changing minds much more rapidly, and as a result, there's a really, I believe absolutely that we're going to make the change that we want and need to see.
Great. Well, that's about all our time for today. You had managed to answer the last 2 questions with that last answer. And so I just want to thank you, Maya. This has been a delightful conversation, and I'm sure it's not the last. And I do want to encourage our listeners, at retakeourdemocracy.org, we'll definitely promote the conversation with Antoinette Cedillo Lopez, and also delve into some of the other activities and relationships that Maya has been forming in New Mexico, so that we can support that work and keep you informed about how you can support that work. And so I want to thank you very much for being with us this afternoon, and being aired in the morning. We're in the afternoon. And so thank you very much. And if you want to give people, again, the website where they can get more information, I have down here that NM Green Amendment is that right? To get to
nmgreenamendment.org takes you to the
Okay.
New Mexico page.
Okay, and how would they get just general information on the Green Amendment?
For thegenerations.org, or if they bought the book, The Green Amendment, every single penny goes to the Green Amendment movement, and it sort of lays out the need and the goals. But for thegenerations.org, we have a lot of information, including a free teacher guide and student guide in case teachers want to bring this message into the classroom. So,
Okay.
and I just want to thank you, Paul. I want to thank you for all you do for the earth and for our communities, and for giving me this opportunity to share this message. It really means a lot to me. Thank you.
Okay, well, we're going to close the show. You stay on here for a second, because I want to talk to you for a minute, and then we'll be back next week. Retake Our Democracy at 8:30 in the morning on KSFR. retakeourdemocracy.org to subscribe to our blog. We blog 4 days a week, sometimes 5, sometimes 6, but mostly 4. And